What's up, guys? It's Brent with Lykins Motorsports. That is our 4.6 liter 2-valve dyno mule on the dyno cart from several weeks ago. So the big decision since then was to tear it down and go on to the next iteration, which is the trick flow heads and the molly pistons. A lot more compression, aluminum rods, just a lot of trick go fast parts to make a lot of horsepower, or get my feet wet in the single overhead cam world, since it'd be good for me to do that before I jump into a max effort build. And I also have a couple of FE cameras coming up that it'll do me some good to think a little bit outside the normal pushrod V8 motor, and throw some cams in this engine to see what we can do with it. So the very first problem I had was these engines are notorious for low piston to valve clearance, especially on the intake side. So that automatically just complicates things right off the bat, because you want to add duration, you want to add lift if you can, you want to add overlap to make the engine pull to a higher RPM to make more horsepower, and to change the overall functioning of the engine. So very difficult choice right off the bat. There's a couple of companies that make cams for this particular engine, and they'll put in their description, this is as big as you can go without changing the valves, because the intake valves on these engines the margins are really thick, or this is as big as you can go without adding valve reliefs to the pistons. And as I've talked about in previous videos, the pistons are a dish piston, and the intake valve hits right at the edge of the dish and the quench pad. So if you were to make a relief there, it would give you, considerably more clearance. My goal was to not do anything like that, but just to see what I could come up with within the constraints of how the engine is designed and built. So before we just jump into all of this, I just want to say that this has been pretty much a fiasco in getting data. There's a lot of overhead cam lobes in the catalogs that they just don't give the data for that they do the pushrod engines. And I hate to be an absolute pest to the guys that I send my orders into from Bullet and Comp, and I work with these guys pretty much every day, and working with them is one thing, but just getting on their nerves is completely a different thing. So I probably could have gotten on their nerves and kind of nailed this down a little bit further, but I think we're going to be okay where we stand. So let's go over emails dinging in the backgrounds. I'm always getting emails. Let's take a break here for a second, and we'll go over some software that I use to get some data. I'm going to drop it right in a notepad text file so that you can see it, and we'll kind of progress as we go. Okay, so this is just a little text file that I popped up here, and I'm just taking notes on it, basically just so you guys can see the method to my madness. The first thing that I had to do with all of this, and this would work for any engine that you're working on, any pushrod or overhead cam engine, was measure the valve drop at top dead center. If you want to see how I do that, I just did a video a week or so ago which basically outlined the process of it. You find true top dead center with a degree wheel, you pop your valve springs off, and with it number 1 or number 2 or any of them, piston at top dead center, you basically just measure how far the valve falls before it contacts the piston. And as you can see here, this is why we have so much trouble with this engine. So the intake side, 100 thousandths is all I had, and on the exhaust side, 212 thousandths. So I started looking through some lobe catalogs. I knew basically about where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the mid 230s if I could on the intake side, with a big enough split that to help the exhaust side out at a higher RPM. With the factory cams, which were 200, 204 at 50, this thing peaked at 5600. So, if I'm adding 30 degrees more duration, I'm hoping that the heads will at least let it work a little bit and pull some RPM. So, I wanted to be in the mid 230s or so on 50 thousandths duration. I wanted to keep the valve lift around where it is right now, so 500 lift on the intake side. I think the exhaust side is something like 540. But as I mentioned in the earlier videos, when you look at the flow numbers of the heads, they just don't change much from that 400 to 550 range. So if I needed to buy myself a few thousandths, it was going to be in the lift department. So I started looking through Comp Cam's lobe catalog. Again, I had a couple of guys that I deal with on a general basis when I order cams from them. Chris Ryan is such a good guy, and he puts up with all my nonsense and funneled me some data. So I'm going to show you what you can get when you ask for it. So I'm going to pop my email open here. Chris Ryan. And so here's the first cam that I looked at from Comp. So this one is 238, 246 at 50. The advertised duration is 286, 294. So let's talk about why we're choosing durations around that range. The 50 thousandths duration on the intake side generally dictates where the engine peaks the horsepower. The advertised duration, so the duration at 6, will help determine how aggressive the lobe is. It will determine how much overlap the cam has when combined with the lobe separation angle. And generally speaking, with this engine, the higher the intake center line, the more valve clearance I had. Okay, so that's why we can't go to the 108s and 109s and 110s. I'm looking probably in the 114 to 116 range. Unfortunately, that's going to be about where the intake center line is going to be. We'll talk about more about that here in a second. But in order to get the valve lift at top dead center and to get the valve lift at like 10 degrees before top dead center and after top dead center in the right spots, we basically had to use similar advertised durations around the 280s and 290s mark. So this is the cam that I chose from Comp's lobe catalog, 116 lobe separation angle. This is the data that you get when you ask nicely. And so let me make something else very clear here. Comp cams on their overhead cam lobe catalog, the lift at top dead center already has the rocker arm follower ratio built into it. When you go to bullet, it does not. So I found that out. That took me a good week to decipher between what the data that I was getting. So Comp cams follower ratios calculated in, bullet cams it is not. So lift at top dead center, you can see I'm right around this area right here. Lift at top dead center, 58 thousandths on the intake side, 79 thousandths on the exhaust side. You also get all these different measurements. Lift at 5 degrees after top dead center, lift at 10 degrees after top dead center, lift at 15 degrees after top dead center on the exhaust sides before. Generally speaking, your intake valve is going to be the closest, your piston valve clearance is going to be the closest at somewhere around 10 degrees after top dead center. Your exhaust side is usually going to be closest somewhere usually around 10 degrees before top dead center. So it's good to incorporate those numbers, 10 degrees before and after top dead center. So we go through here and we look at all of our data, and then I go back to my handy notepad here, and so comp cams lift at top dead center. I went ahead and filled all this out. 58, 79 at 5 degrees, 79, 102, blah blah blah, blah blah blah. Before we get into this any further, we have to determine how far the piston is down from top dead center at these various degrees. Okay, so we know what the clearance is at top dead center. In order to get our clearances 10 degrees before top dead center and 10 degrees after top dead center, we have to use a calculator. Wallace Racing makes this really nice piston travel calculator. You just put in your stroke, your rod length, and what angle you want it to be. So at 5 degrees before or after top dead center, the piston is 10 thousandths down from top dead center. So piston movement, 10 thousandths. If we go back, we do this again, 30 thousandths down. If we do it again, 80 thousandths down. Alright, so that means our total clearance, or basically our valve drop clearance, would be the 100 plus the 10, right? So we had 100 thousandths clearance at top dead center. At 5 degrees, our piston is 10 thousandths down, so that's going to put us a total of 110 thousandths. Same with here. Same here. On the exhaust side, we're going to be 222. 242, and then 292. So we've got this, we've got all of our data. We know pretty much how far our piston is going to be, the valve drop at top dead center. We know pretty much what the valve drop would be at these distances, and we can start plugging in our piston to valve clearances that are pretty much theoretical but should be pretty close. So we go lift at top dead center, 58 thousandths and 79 thousandths. So we just compare these numbers to these numbers up here, and we can get our clearances. So 100 minus 58 would be 42 thousandths, and 212 minus 79 thousandths would be 133. So with the comp cams cam at top dead center, this should be what our piston valve clearance should be. I can come down here. We can do this again. Since comp cams gave us the valve lift at 5 degrees, and we have these numbers up here that we've calculated. We can now calculate the clearances. So we can go 110 minus 79, and there's 31 thousandths. And we can do 222 minus 102, and we should get 120. We can keep on going. At 10 degrees, we have 130 thousandths on our intake side, and we have 104 thousandths lift. You can see our piston to valve clearance is slowly going away from us. And on the exhaust side, got 114. At 15 degrees, we have 180 thousandths available to us. We've got 131 thousandths lift. So we're starting to go back the other direction now. 292 minus 156. 136 thousandths. So here's where our tight spot should be. So with this cam, I would have about 26 thousandths intake valve to piston clearance, 114 thousandths exhaust valve to piston clearance. In a pushrod motor, this this is kind of pushing it. On an overhead cam motor, especially these modular Fords with 7mm valve stems, the lifters, the hydraulic lash adjusters are small. They don't weigh much. I'm going to be running titanium retainers. Everything is small, no push rods. So you can get away with this and probably a little bit tighter. And what I'll do when I get the cams in and I start degreeing those and checking piston valve clearance, I can either advance or retard the cam timing and really dial this in. So yeah, comp cams clearances at 10 degrees is our tight spot. So we can do the same thing with bullet. And again, our clearances are 100 and 210 at top dead center, so this is easy. We've got 48 and 140. I'm just checking over my notes to make sure I didn't whopper jaw something. Let's see. Yep, good to go. And then we just got 10 degree numbers from bullet, and that's fine. Our distance here to take up 130, 242. So 130 minus 103 is 27 thousandths. And 242 minus 127 is 115 thousandths. So very similar piston to valve clearances, theoretical piston to valve clearances. So with that being said, let's look at the specs from the comp cams selection. The numbers are 238, 246 at 50, 286, 294 advertised, 500 lift, 500 lift. Unfortunately, we have to go with a 116 LSA so that we can keep the intake center line and the exhaust center line at around 116. Let me show you some other stuff here. This is a DCR calculator. We'll just go through some general numbers here. Our Bore is 3.552. Our stroke is 543. These are generally about a 44cc chamber. We'll just throw some random numbers in here because it doesn't really matter as long as I get to this compression ratio number here, which is about 9.5 to 1, which is what those motors were rated for. And if we look at the advertised durations for this one, remember our lobe separation angle 116, intake center line is also 116 to get those clearances that we need. If you advance the cam timing, you lose your intake piston valve clearance. If you retard the cam timing, then you gain intake piston valve clearance. So we're going to start at those numbers. Here's what I don't like about the comp cam stick. The overlap is about where I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be somewhere around 55, 56 degrees for this engine. But when we look at the dynamic compression ratio, we don't have any. So I use this calculator exclusively. I've got probably 20 years of data with this particular calculator, so I know how engines interact with the dynamic compression ratio that it spits out. 6.6 is really low, and that just basically reflects how much cylinder pressure you're going to have, and it's not much. So I can clear all this, and we can go back to the bullet specs, which is, let me look at my numbers here, 238, 245 at 50. It's a little quicker lobe at 280, 285 advertised. Valve lift is 475 and 500. But we can go on a 114 lobe separation angle, ground straight up, which means the intake center line is the same as the lobe separation angle. So where does that put us? A little bit quicker lobe, which is good. Not always, as Daniel Powell just demonstrated in one of his dyno mules, but in this situation I think it's going to be good for us. The lower intake center line will help us with our man, I cleared the wrong one. Man, I'm a loser. Let's go through all this again here. 3.572. Nope, 52. Nope, Brent. 2. I can't do anything when I'm being watched. That's why I don't fly so well with a flight instructor. Alright, we should have 9.5. We'll clear this one. Alright, so the advertised 280, 285, 114, 114. So we got that around that 55 degrees of overlap number. Our dynamic stroke length went up, and so did our DCR. Now it's at 7. It's still low. Guys, this is about the best that I'm going to get. I'm trying to juggle so many different variables. And again, I'm trying to not make myself a pest of comp cams and bullet cams. So if I wanted to and they were able to just sit down and talk with me for an hour and spit out lobes while I calculate all this stuff, we could probably back into maybe a little bit better of a choice. But so far, I'm where I want to be as far as cam specs and our overlap and valve lift and all that sort of thing. And if I had my arm twisted after I dyno this iteration, I maybe talked into changing to a thinner margin valve, or maybe whacking on the pistons a little bit, and then really advancing this cam just to see how much cylinder pressure and dynamic compression ratio we pick up. I don't know. That's a long way away. So I went ahead, I've placed the order with Bullet. He's still saying about 8 weeks. they set up on one engine family at a time, and the modular stuff just isn't as popular as the other engine families, so they have to wait until they get a bunch to swap over to all at once. So hopefully it'll be around 8 weeks. So, with all this being said, I hope all that made sense. If not, the good thing about YouTube video is that you can go back and, listen to it again, look at the numbers again, see if it makes sense. So I had to do this exact same thing for Eric Weingartner's Small Block Ford Challenge. He gave us limits on what our piston to valve clearance could be, and we're trying to juggle all these different variables in order to get the most out of our cam, but not break the rules. So this is an exercise in patience and an exercise in engine mathematics. So it's a good tool to put in your toolbox if you're able. Alright, I'm going to call it a day. Like I said, I hope this has been helpful to you. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if I fat fingered a number or did something wrong. So if you pick out some math or something that I did wrong, very constructively and gingerly leave a comment. Don't don't come through breaking the wall like the Kool-Aid guy. Okay, have some courtesy and common sense on how to speak to people. But this is what I'm going to go with. Hope you guys are having a good week so far, and hope this is a good Monday evening video for you. Y'all take care. I will see you soon.